The leaves had begun to turn. Fiery red, burnt orange, fading gold. In the quiet town of Asheville, North Carolina, where the Blue Ridge Mountains kissed the horizon, Eleanor Ellie Hayes stood on the wraparound porch of her old family home. She was 71 now, a widow for 6 years, and the silence of her days had settled around her like a soft, familiar blanket. She sipped her tea, the steam swirling into the chilly October air, when a knock at the gate caught her attention. A tall man with silver hair and kind eyes stood there, holding a dusty backpack and a hesitant smile. "Ellie Hayes?" he asked. "Yes, I'm Thomas Langdon. We went to high school together. You might not remember me." Ellie set her cup down, squinting. "Tommy Langdon. You wore a corduroy jacket and wrote poetry in your notebook." His smile grew. "I can't believe you remember that. I never forgot." She opened the gate. "Come in." They sat on the porch, talking like no time had passed. Thomas had been a quiet boy back then, the kind who walked home alone and watched the world like it was a story unfolding. Ellie had been popular, full of laughter, bound for college and adventure. They were never more than classmates, yet she remembered the way he looked at her, like she was something delicate and rare. "I moved back after my wife passed," he said. 3 years ago. I've been meaning to stop by, but you know how it is. Time slips away." Ellie nodded. "My Richard's been gone 6 years. Some days feel long, others vanish. But I'm glad you came." They talked until the sun dipped below the mountains. Before he left, Thomas turned to her. "Would you join me for coffee sometime?" Ellie smiled. "I'd like that." That coffee turned into weekly walks, then late dinners. They talked about their children, grown now, scattered across states, about the wars they lived through, the music they loved, the dreams they let go of, and the ones that quietly lingered. "I used to write poetry," Thomas said one evening, handing her a worn notebook. She flipped through pages of faded ink, her heart catching on one dated October 1969. "You laugh like summer, bright and free, and I am winter, quiet and cold. But I'd give my snow for one more glance at her who never knew I loved." Ellie looked up, eyes wide. "This was about me?" Thomas didn't answer. He didn't need to. Love in your 70s is not like love in your 20s. It doesn't rush or burn fast. It warms slowly, like soup on the stove, like a fire in the hearth. It remembers loss and holds space for it. It's not about starting over. It's about continuing with someone who understands the weight of time. One evening, as Ellie closed the door behind her after another long conversation with Thomas, she found a single sunflower on her porch, tied with a ribbon. A note was attached. "I missed my chance once. I don't want to miss it again." She pressed the flower to her chest, tears falling. By spring, Thomas had moved into the guest room of Ellie's house. Not out of urgency or need, but because it felt right. They still kept their own lives, their own corners. But there was always coffee for two, books left open for the other to read, a blanket shared on the porch. They danced, sometimes slow, barefoot dances in the kitchen when no one was watching. They didn't post photos. They didn't chase time. They simply were. On their first anniversary of reunion, Thomas took Ellie back to their old high school. It had long since closed, but the building remained. They walked its halls, now silent. "I never told you," he said, stopping by the old library. "Back then, I used to write poems just for you. I never gave them because I thought you were out of reach. But I kept writing." She touched his hand. "And I waited a lifetime for someone to write me poetry." In the summer of her 73rd year, Ellie fell ill. Nothing sudden, just the slow unraveling of a body well used, well loved. Thomas never left her side. He read to her, fed her soup, kissed her forehead each morning. One afternoon, weak but smiling, she whispered, "Do you regret waiting so long?" He kissed her hand. "No, because in the end I still found you." When Ellie passed, the town came to her funeral. People spoke of her warmth, her garden, her stories. But Thomas read a poem, one he had never shared with anyone. "If love comes late, it does not mean it's less, For fire at dusk can still warm the night. And though our autumn was short, it was enough, because it was true. He buried the poem with her, folded into her favorite book. And every year, on October 14th, a sunflower appeared on her grave. Thomas Langdon returned to the empty house on Maple Lane, its every creak and silence reminding him of Eleanor. Her teacups still sat in the cabinet. Her books were on the nightstand with tiny notes in the margins. Her voice, though no longer heard aloud, lingered in the very walls. The first weeks were a fog. He would wake up at dawn to the smell of nothing, forgetting for a moment she wasn't in the kitchen. He'd find himself turning to speak, only to remember there would be no answer. But there was no bitterness in the silence, only longing and love. He still left a sunflower on her grave every October 14th. But he also began writing again. Not the aching, distant poems of his youth, but quiet reflections of their time together. He filled a notebook titled The Days After Her, which he never intended anyone to read. One chilly afternoon in early November, Thomas sat on a bench in the town's park, notebook in hand, when a soft voice spoke behind him. "Are you Mr. Langdon?" He turned. A young woman, maybe in her early 30s, stood there holding a boy by the hand. "I'm Grace Taylor. My son, Liam, and I live down the street. I used to see you and Mrs. Hayes walking every Sunday." Thomas smiled gently. "Yes, that was our ritual. I just wanted to say, I always admired how you looked at her, like she was still the girl you fell for in high school." He looked down, touched by the unexpected kindness. "She was, every day." Grace hesitated, then asked, "Would you mind telling me about her? I lost my mom recently. I think I need to believe people like Eleanor exist." Thomas closed the notebook. "Sit down. I'll tell you everything." And so it began. Thomas, now 73, began hosting small porch gatherings on Saturday afternoons. It started with Grace and her son, then neighbors, then strangers who'd heard of the man who writes love stories. He told them about Eleanor's stubbornness, her laugh that made dogs bark, the way she sang to plants and left cookies on every doorstep. He read poetry and made tea, just like she used to. He didn't just remember her, he kept her alive in story. By spring, the gatherings became a community circle. Widows, veterans, lonely retirees, young parents, all sat in folding chairs and listened to stories about love that came late but came true. They called it Ellie's Porch. One evening, Grace brought over a sealed box. "I found this in a thrift store in Asheville. I think it's yours." Thomas opened it slowly, and there they were, the poems he had written in high school, pages he'd thought lost, somehow returned to him. Among them was one he'd never seen. It was written in Eleanor's handwriting. "I always knew, Tom, even back then, but I thought you deserved more than someone already halfway gone in her head with dreams. Turns out I just needed to grow into the kind of woman who could meet your eyes and say, 'Stay.'" Thomas read the note 5 times. Then he cried for the first time since her funeral. In the summer of his 75th year, Thomas published a small book, Autumn Whispers, Letters to Eleanor. It was filled with poems, journal entries, and stories about their time together. It became a local bestseller. Not because it was flashy, but because it was real. People over 50, 60, 70 wrote letters to him, thanking him for reminding them that love doesn't belong only to the young. That holding hands, slow dancing, and whispered goodnights could happen well past the first wrinkles and gray hairs. Thomas answered every letter by hand. One winter, Thomas fell ill. Nothing serious at first, just tiredness, shortness of breath. But the doctors found a weak heart. Nothing could be done except slow down. Grace began taking over the Saturday gatherings. She read from Thomas's books, even began writing her own stories. The tradition lived on. On one of his last evenings outside, Thomas sat on the porch, wrapped in a thick blanket. Liam, now 8, sat beside him. "Mr. Thomas?" the boy asked. "Do you think Miss Ellie can hear you when you talk?" Thomas looked at the sky, glowing with the last pink light of the day. "I think love is like wind, Liam. You can't see it, but you feel it, and it never really leaves. The morning Thomas passed away, there was a poem left on his nightstand. The fire has dimmed, but the coals are warm, and in the hush between each breath, I feel her hand still tucked in mine. Love did not leave me. Love simply waited. At his funeral, Grace placed the first copy of Autumn Whispers on his casket, beside a sunflower. Thomas taught me that love isn't about how long you have. It's about how open your heart is, even after everything you've lost. The porch on Maple Lane remained untouched. The chairs still in their circle, Eleanor's flowers blooming every spring, the notebook of poems framed in the library. And every Saturday, people gathered there, telling stories, reading poems, sipping tea. They didn't come to mourn. They came to remember what it means to love fully.